Hello and welcome to a special episode of This Week at the Movies. I am jumping in to go over a packed weekend of films and options for you both in theaters and streaming. Eric and I are off of our regular slot this week, but we will be back next Saturday to talk Sinners. But before then, I wanted to dive in because it is, as I mentioned, a packed week of releases and some of the best films I've seen so far this year. I am so excited to dive in. So let's begin with the first offering, and that is a wide theatrical release, The Amateur. You know, sometimes ordinary people can do extraordinary things if they get the right push. That's the premise of The Amateur. It's a new film starring Rami Malek based on the novel from Robert Littell. This isn't the first time the story has been adapted, but it's a fascinating update on the story that makes its way to theaters this weekend. We're introduced to Charlie Heller, played by Malik, and his wife Sarah, played by Rachel Brosnahan. They are very much in love, but very different. Charlie, kind of addicted to his puzzles, working as a top analyst for the CIA. Sarah is more grounded to the real world, heading off to London for a conference. Charlie reports to work where a secret contact shares a file. When he opens it, he discovers that the file shows some dirty deeds being done by those within his own agency, and the lengths gone to cover it up by Director Moore, played by Holt McCallum. Charlie is so locked into his puzzle, he really doesn't get time to connect with his wife. Turns out he never will. The next day, Charlie learns Sarah has been killed by terrorists when their meeting went wrong. He's devastated and uses his skills to find the killers, but when he shares his findings with Moore, he doesn't get much of a response. So Charlie uses what he's found to blackmail the director into giving him the training he needs to exact his own revenge. He's paired with Colonel Henderson, played by Lawrence Fishburne. And even after a few weeks of training, Charlie doesn't exhibit the traits of being much of an agent. But with Moore's patience at an end, Charlie strikes off on his own because he has to find his own way to do what needs to be done. This film, as I mentioned, is based on a novel, but it was already adapted once into a film in 1981 by Littell. That one has more of a Cold War connection to East Germany and Russia, but the basic idea remains the same in this updated version. However, the execution I thought was a lot more engaging. This version takes time to focus on that relationship between Charlie and Sarah, something that I never really got out of the 1981 original. That's a credit to writers Ken Nolan and Gary Spinelli. I also enjoyed the way we followed Charlie and his progress through this mission, ending with a third act that offers a surprising and satisfying twist on the original ending. There are some good performances too. Fishburne, Brosnahan, Katrina Balfe, Michael Stuhlbarg, and John Bernthal all do a nice job in supporting roles, but this is really about Rami Malek. He carries a bulk of the narrative as in nearly every scene. He does a really nice job as the lead, creating a character you want to root for within this film. Not all the storylines worked incredibly, but the main story is put together well enough to work. These kind of films just really need a solid lead and enough entertainment in the main plot to be entertaining and satisfying. This one certainly has that. The Amateur opened wide today, Friday, April 11th. I gave it 3.5 stars out of 5. Next up, you've probably seen the ads for Drop everywhere. Christopher Landon certainly knows his way around a horror franchise. He started as a writer, gave us Paranormal Activity, but as a writer-director, he's given us some fun titles with some personality, among them Happy Death Day and Freaky. They always find a way to blend the humor and the action. That's true of his latest film, Drop, which opened today, but it's not quite as funny as some of his previous work. But when it picks its moments, it really landed for me. What it is more than anything is a thrill ride from beginning to end that will have you engaged and entertained. We pick up by meeting Violet, played by Megan Fahey. She's a single mother who hasn't dated in a while. She survived a toxic relationship, which we get a glimpse of to start the film, and she spent some time putting herself back together. But she started chatting with Henry, played by Brandon Sklenar, and a slow building spark is there. She's reached the point where she feels ready to go out, but as the night of their date arrives, she is beyond nervous. Her sister Jen, played by Violet Bean, arrives to watch Violet's son, but also tries to provide some moral support as she gets ready for a night out. Finally, she heads out to meet Henry and arrives at the restaurant early, pulling up at the bar to wait. She meets a few interesting people there and then starts getting some random drops on her phone. She ignores them, but they soon become progressively more aggressive, finally issuing a warning that she either plays her game or her son dies. That leaves her scared and nervous, but she's reeling as she tries to balance an outward expression of calm to make a first date go well and some internal strife. Can she solve that puzzle before it's too late? This one, as I mentioned, has had a ton of trailers. You're probably sick of seeing them. I just wanted to see how the movie would stack up. And this is a great kind of a setup for a film. Much of it takes place in a crowded but intimate restaurant setting seated high above Chicago. We spend a lot of time focused on Violet and Henry, trying to process the events of the day around them. There are mixes of humor and fun, but mostly this keeps on task. The film runs a tight 95 minutes, keeping the intensity in the second and third act. After a charming introduction to the people and the world, by the time we get to the confrontation, you're a little hooked on these characters and what's about to happen. You know, I've enjoyed many of Landon's recent films, and he really keeps up that strong track record. While I appreciated the tension and the drama here, I got a kick out of the use of the humor, as I mentioned, when they decide to employ it, especially as a kicker at the end. It was great for me. The obnoxious try-hard waiter played by Jeffrey Solf is great. The beginning and ending sequences with Violent Bean, who is the film's comedy MVP, were really fun. The final sequence is just a kick that made me laugh audibly as I was leaving the screening. This film works thanks to Fahey and Sklenar. They have a good chemistry that holds up through a tough and unique evening. You're rooting for them, which I think is a credit to their character work. And even if you see some of the twists coming, like who might be sending these drops, that was something I kind of spotted early in the film. It's still well worth the investment and doesn't detract from your enjoyment of a slick thriller that had a blend of humor and action. I think you're going to enjoy the ride. Drop opened nationwide in theaters today. I gave it 3.5 stars out of 5. Well, I've given you a couple of theater films. We'll get back to the theater in a minute, but first let's swing over to the small screen and look up G20, which dropped on Prime Video yesterday. You know, sometimes you just want to kick back and watch the action unfold on screen. These kind of movies usually aren't complex, but they can be a real escape from reality. When you're looking for entertainment that doesn't require a lot of effort, that can really hit the spot. That's probably the best case scenario for G20, which is a new film, as I mentioned, that's now streaming on Prime Video. The film focuses on, you guessed it, the G20 summit, which brings together the leaders of the 20 wealthiest nations to discuss the global economy. I know it sounds boring, but stick with me for a minute. This year, it turns out the summit is under attack from terrorists. You know, that puts a crimp in the plans of President Sutton, played by Viola Davis, who is there pitching an important world proposal. She's also brought her family along, including her husband, played by Anthony Anderson, and leaves them all vulnerable. When the terrorists attack, Sutton and her security chief, Agent Manny, played by Ramon Rodriguez, are able to get out of the room with a small group of survivors, but it's no easy task. Meanwhile, Derek moves to get their children, but finds himself taken captive along the way. Refusing to cower and hide, the president and Manny fight their way through the terrorists and hatch a plan to regain control and save the world. That, of course, rankles the leader of the terrorists, Prime Video alum Anthony Starr, best known from his work on The Boys. He has some big plans in this one. He plans to use the strike to collapse the global economy and make himself incredibly wealthy. He also has a past connection to Sutton that is fueling his rage, although the film doesn't make a ton of use of that, even though it does pop up in the third act. Look, not a complex story, but it's an interesting kind of film that's a good action feature. It joins a proud tradition of the, president in trouble genre of films that have long captivated audiences, myself included. I'm someone that has the Has Fallen series all on digital. I own a copy of White House Down and Air Force One. I'm probably the target audience here. And if that's all you're looking for, this will really hit the spot. Davis makes for a compelling lead as the president and an action star. I liked her being paired with Rodriguez, who I've really enjoyed on the small screen as Will Trent. He's strong in a supporting role here, does a nice job as an action star. The film has a solid supporting cast. The weakness is probably the villains. Star's leader is a little too thin and one note all the way through to the end of the film. The twist involving who the inside man is was a little predictable and a little flat. We come to these films hoping for a little bit of an escape and some good action sequences. I think in that sense, G20 delivers. It's not an exceptional film, but it was a fun ride, especially for action movie fans. I gave it 3 stars out of 5. As I mentioned, it is now streaming on Prime Video. Well, that's a streaming option, and we'll get more streaming later, but let's not give up on the theater just yet. If you're looking for something a little bit quieter and a little bit different than what I've mentioned, Sacramento may be just the ticket for you. You know, we all have worries that occupy our minds. Sometimes these worries are too much for us to bear, and it's during those times it can be helpful to have someone to lean on, even if it's someone you don't necessarily expect. In Sacramento, we're quickly introduced to Ricky, played by Michael Angelano, who is sitting naked by a lake. He stumbles onto a woman, Tally, played by Maya Erskine. Then they have kind of a mute cute. They talk about a potential future by the lake, where Tally worries that Ricky is the kind of guy who'd run away. Keep that in the back of your mind. Flash forward a year, and we meet Glenn, played by Michael Cera. He's wound very tightly, looking at a crib for his soon-to-be-born child. The crib has a little squeak. He starts to put it through his paces, and by the time his wife, Rosie, played by Kristen Stewart, arrives, he snapped the gate off entirely. Rosie understands it isn't really about the crib. Glenn is kind of wound tightly as a person a lot, and with potential layoffs looming at his work, he's wound even tighter. When Ricky shows up, it doesn't put Glenn at ease, but Ricky says his father died and he wants Glenn to go with him on a road trip to Sacramento to spread the ashes. Glenn is really apprehensive about doing that, but Rosie suggests it might be the exact kind of push he needs to get back on track. So Ricky and Glenn set off. It's an adventure that, as you might expect, does not go as planned, but this isn't really about that stated purpose. It's about what both of these friends need to get their issues in check to move on to that next phase of life. These kind of road movies are often a bit of fun. You have adventure, you have pathos, you have usually some kind of rich emotional payoff. We get that in bits here. Arranjano wrote the film, directed it, clearly has a feel for the material that helps him get in tight with the story and where we're going. The film is at its best when we have Glenn and Ricky kind of going back and forth on the road trip. Their uneasy friendship, their shared issues lead to some amusing and some cathartic moments. The film also makes a decent use of Erskine, who has a kind of interesting return in the third act. The same can't be said of Stewart. She is a decent actress, but she isn't really given a lot to do. In fact, I often found myself wondering why Rosie would be putting up with Glenn's shtick. There just isn't enough of a connection between their characters for it to make a lot of sense. There's also a plot choice near the end of the film that will really govern how you feel. It was a wild plot swing for me, and it just didn't quite land. It will work better for you if you feel more drawn to that. Overall, I enjoyed bits and pieces of this film. It was a fun enough ride to be a pleasant enough watch. It's a little bit of different counter programming given the other things that are in theaters right now. Sacramento opened in limited release today, Friday, April 11th. I gave it 2.5 stars out of 5. Final theatrical film of the week. I saved the best for last, and that is Warfare. You know, last year, Alex Garland gave us an emotional and intense film that dropped us right in the middle of a conflict. That movie was Civil War. It dropped in April of 2024, and it was a heck of a ride. It had a lot of hard, big ideas, but it was the realistic combat situations that left some of the biggest impressions. That ended up being one of my favorite films of the year. And a year later, he is back with another intense drama, this one really grounded by real events and a real-time feel. Warfare, which opened today, takes the action back to Iraq in 2006. It's in the midst of war. We follow a platoon of Navy SEALs who are occupying a house in the middle of a crowded city. Over the course of 90 minutes, we watch as things go terribly wrong and they have to fight their way out of the city, caring for their wounded along the way. The film comes from Garland, who co-wrote and co-directed it with Ray Mendoza. Mendoza was a Navy SEAL, and this film is based on his real experiences. That gives it a level of authenticity that you feel throughout the production. It's incredible and incredibly tense at times. It's visceral, it's chaotic, everything feels realistic, and it will probably rock you to your core in the most satisfying ways. It's unlike anything I've seen, and honestly, it's one of the best movies of the year so far. It was a deeply emotional ride that played out incredibly on the big screen. If that is for you, go and check it out. I will say it is very intense and definitely earns its R rating. If you don't do well with those kind of things, this will be a lot to take. But Warfare is now playing in theaters nationwide. I gave it 4 stars out of 5. As I mentioned, one of my favorite films of the year. Well, before I get out of here, I want to kick back to the small screen and a streaming option, and that is Black Mirror. And I know what you're saying. Hold the phone. This isn't a movie. Well, that's true. This anthology series from Charlie Brooker has always been about science fiction tales that take a look at the downside or possibly the dark side of technology in our world. It's presented some jarring and fantastic stories. You know, it began as a series for BBC, but was eventually purchased by Netflix, which has turned out several seasons, including the latest, which is season number 7. It dropped on Thursday. This season features 6 episodes. Each is self-contained with a different cast and a different world. They're all like mini movies. It also includes this year a sequel to USS Callister, one of the most famous of the Black Mirror tales. Among this year's offering, I'm going to say I really enjoyed the 3rd episode, Hotel Reverie, which features some great work from Issa Rae and Emma Corrin. It's a black and white tale that has a tragically romantic core. I also quite like the sequel episode, which is the final one of the group and the longest at about 88 minutes. It very much feels like a short feature film. It's called USS Callister Into Infinity. And again, it features just a top shelf performance from Kristen Milioti. My favorite of the group was actually the 5th episode, Eulogy, which is led by Paul Giamatti. It was unexpectedly emotional and it was just beautifully done. The whole season is amazing. I have watched all 6. 2 of them are a little bit over an hour. As I mentioned, USS Callister sequel is an hour and 28 minutes. Hotel Reverie, about an hour and 20 minutes. Most of them are between 48 minutes and an hour. Not, you can watch them in a bunch. You can watch them all at one time. You can watch them over the course of an afternoon. There is just a lot to like in Black Mirror. If you've been a fan before, season 7 is well worth checking out. Well, that'll do it for me today. But as you can see, there is no shortage of great options to see both at the theater and at home on streaming. I hope you take some time to check that out. I will be back tomorrow morning talking a little bit about 3 TV series that have wrapped up their run, and taking a look a little bit at where we are in the year on the small screen. And as I mentioned, Eric and I will be back next Saturday talking Sinners. So until then, I hope you guys enjoy a great time.